Okay, The Prince Warriors and the Swords of Rima, Volume 3 by Priscilla Shirer, Chapter 26, Footsteps. Brianna crouched against a wall, hugging her knees to her chest. She was so tired she could barely move. She had been running for so long, trying to stay ahead of the forger on her trail, that she no longer had any idea where she was or how to get back to Ivy again. The hallways all looked exactly the same. Whenever she turned a corner, there it was again, the fake hall of armor. But when she called out for Ivy, she heard no response. If she stopped to rest, the dreadful footsteps of the forger began to echo through the tunnel, so that she had to get up and run again. How long could she go on like this? She had no armor, no weapons. She felt lost and helpless and very weary. Don't cry. She said that over and over to herself, even though crying was all she wanted to do. Victor. He's been working for the enemy all the time. Now, she was stuck in this horrible place, and her friend was locked behind one of these doors, probably being turned into metal. If only I could go back, she thought, to the moment before Victor rode up on the bike, to when she and Ivy had been playing with Star on the front lawn, and everything had been peaceful. The footsteps reverberated through the hallway, jarring her back to the present. She jumped up, her heart racing, and started to run again. Her lungs ached and her legs were shaking. But the footsteps got louder, ever nearer. Then Brianna tripped and fell forward, sprawling on the floor. She let out a gasp of pain, but lay still. There was no point in running anymore. Bean! Brianna raised her head. She blinked. Levi stood before her, his eyes wide, as if he couldn't believe she was really there. Levi! She looked at him suspiciously. Hadn't a forger made itself look exactly like Levi once in order to trap him in a dome? How was she to know this was the real Levi? It's me, honest, said Levi. Who else would call you Bean? Xavier and Evan appeared on either side of him, followed by Mr. J.R. All of them. Brianna let out a gasp of relief, jumped to her feet, and threw her arms around Levi. Then she hugged Mr. J.R. and Xavier, who stiffened as if taken off guard. Evan backed away, holding up his hand to ward her off. He said, no hugging. Oh, right, sorry, Brianna said, wiping away a stray tear from her eye. She smiled despite her still hammering heart. I can't tell you how glad I am to see you guys. How did you find me? The armor led us to you, said Levi. But what about the forger? Forger? Just then a roar like a jet engine rose up behind them. They whirled to see a forger towering over them, its giant metal hand reaching for Xavier. Mr. J.R. had his sword out in an instant, slashing at the forger's arm, knocking it away. It roared again, grabbing Mr. J.R. by the neck with its other arm. Dad! Levi yelled. He swung his sword and struck the arm that held his dad. The forger shook Mr. J.R. like a rag doll and then dropped him, its arm going haywire. Xavier stepped in and thrust his sword into the forger's central orb. Sparks flew from its chest as it wheeled backward and slammed against the tunnel wall. It toppled over and was still, the glowing red of its eyes sputtering and going dark. Levi dropped to his knees by his father. Dad, can you hear me? He shook his father's shoulders. Mr. J.R. grunted. His neck, where the forger had grabbed him, had turned to metal. He could hardly move his jaw at all, making it difficult to understand his words. Mr. J.R. waved his arms toward the tunnel. He's saying, go, said Xavier. We aren't leaving you here, said Levi. Can you walk? Mr. J.R. blinked in reply. The boys helped him to his feet. Which way is Ivy? Levi asked Brianna. I don't know. I got totally lost, and that forger was chasing me, said Brianna. We were in the Hall of Armor. The Hall of Armor? Asked Xavier. Not the real one. Victor told us. Anyway, the doors were open. Ivy went in and it just closed and she was trapped. Okay, said Levi, we need to get back there. He stood up and checked his armor. This way. They started down the tunnel in the direction Levi had pointed. Evan gave one last look at the damaged forger before following. That should teach you not to mess with the Prince warriors, he said. They moved quickly. All was silent except for the sound of their boots echoing through the hallways and Mr. J.R.'s labored breathing. The metal on his neck had started to expand around his jaw. Levi wondered now how much time they had before it spread to the rest of him. They needed to get him to Ruach as soon as possible. They ran down hallway after hallway, checking the breastplate and changing course often. The hallways all looked the same, endless rows of armor and locked doors. Their progress slowed as Mr. J.R. had more trouble breathing, until finally he collapsed against one of the doors, unable to go on. You guys go ahead, said Levi. We'll stay here. My dad needs to. He was interrupted by a faint but furious female voice coming from the other side of the door on which Mr. J.R. slumped. Let me out of here, you slime ball. It was unmistakably Ivy.